guys, welcome. Today I want to take you guys through some Lightbox tutorial. So basically using Fusion360 to create a Lightbox and kind of doing it in more of a, I guess, repeatable format. So if you're going to be creating a bunch of these, this is kind of the method that I use to go through and kind of churn through a bunch of them pretty quickly. That being said, before we get into this, one of the things we're going to want to do, and you can kind of see I just kind of created it here, is we're going to have to get an image. So I currently have a PNG file that I need to convert into an SVG so that way we can import it into Fusion360. So whenever you grab your image, right, you're going to want to go ahead and go to something like SVG Trace or any kind of PNG to SVG software. If you Google it, there'll be a million websites that will do it. I have the pretty good luck with this one, so I tend to use this, but there's, pick up whatever one your preference is. But here what we're going to do, and you kind of see I already kind of created the SVG, but we're going to go and use this PNG file. So usually anything with a transparent background is usually pretty preferable. So we'll go ahead and open it up. And the first thing you'll notice is that it basically picks out the colors that it thinks you want to have included in your SVG. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and click on the eyes because I do not see the eye color in here. And then we're going to come down to convert. So it's going to basically give you a pretty similar copy of what you just had, and we'll go ahead and export to CS to SVG. I already have mine. I just did mine before I started recording, so we'll see how smooth this goes because I haven't done it yet. So one of the things that we'll go ahead and do is switch back into Fusion360. So one of the things that I like to do is I actually have a Lightbox template that I always kind of clone a copy of whenever I make a new Lightbox. So you can kind of see some other Mario related Lightboxes that I've been working on. But the reason why I do this is it kind of has all of the defaults that I usually always set up in a Lightbox project, like my build plate size. But more importantly, it also has a bunch of parameters. So if you're not used to parameters in Fusion360, this is a great place to start using them. So when we think about things that we constantly use when we make light boxes, right, there's a overall thickness, there is a light thickness, so things that we want light to shine through. There's a non-light thickness, so things that we don't want light to shine through. There's wall thicknesses, right? There's all sorts of things that pretty much once you find what works for you, you tend to kind of use it over and over again. So parameters, whether you're in solid mode or sketch mode, you can come down under the modify tab and go to change parameters. And one of the things that you'll see, right, is I have a bunch of pre-built parameters that I always reference. So one being the max size of my build area, so I usually kind of just give myself a few millimeters of space around the whole thing. But you can see that I've already referenced that in my sketch. So you can kind of see down here in my Lightbox component, I have my build size sketch that we have up here. I have max size. So if I go and click that and I change that to, let's just say our Lightbox thickness and hit OK, right, we can see our model has updated because this is now Lightbox thickness. So I can go ahead and set that back to max size, right? Just get that reset, and now we're back to where we were. But that makes it really useful if I ever have to come back in here and tweak something. Maybe the colors I have, I need to make it a little bit thinner or a little bit thicker. I can go here and just change that one setting, and then my whole project, my extrudes that I've done, all the sketch dimensions, essentially kind of get updated for me. So I will share this template. So since we're going to be using this kind of as a starting point, but this is just kind of how I do it. I noticed a lot of the tutorials I originally started to look at when I started making these didn't really have that kind of in mind when they were building them. So it's a little bit different kind of how I approach these things. That being said, with our sketch, right, we've saved our first main component. I've built a sketch in my template that's just basically a square on a centered origin point. And I'm doing it from a top-down view. So perfect, right? If I needed to rebuild this again just for the sake of this particular demo, right, I'm going to come up here, create new sketch, and the plane that we're going to come on is the top-down plane, and I'm just doing a rectangle from a center point. So I click on our origin, and instead of putting an actual dimension, I'm just doing max size, and then we're also going to do max size for this as well, right? And then now we have a fully constrained sketch dimension, and I'm just going to turn these into construction lines because we're not really going to use them for anything other than just making sure we're within the build plate size. So I go ahead and finish this, and I'll just rename this build plate size, whatever you want to call it, but it'll be in the template if you use it. So now that we have that, we want to go ahead and actually create another sketch, and this is going to be in the same top-down origin. That is going to be our image. So I'm going to click on the insert button and then SVG, and I'm going to go ahead and find my SVG we just created. And what we're going to do is try and go ahead and get it centered. So something like this, that is taller than it is wide. What you'll notice is when you click on the little resize handle here and kind of bump this guy up, right, we can make them fit in here pretty well. But sometimes we might get a better fitment to make it a little bit bigger if we rotate it 45 degrees. So I'm going to rotate mine 45, reposition it back in here, and see now I can kind of make it a little bit bigger than it was before. So I want to leave a little bit around the outside of this because I'm going to add about 5 millimeters of offsets for us to essentially build out the lid dimensions, so we can have the lip that basically they snap together both sides. So this looks good. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. One thing we'll note that it's a little disorienting like this, so you can use the orbit tool to basically rotate this guy the right way forward. Once you have that, you can just come up to the top little cube here, right click it, and then set current view as home, fit to view, whatever you want to do. And now anytime you're like looking at it, you can always come back to that home view, so it's all nice and straight for you. So only really need to do that when you're kind of slanting your image to fit it a little bit nicer, but kind of one of the nice things to use. So now that we have this, I want to go through and kind of give the model a once over because I didn't build it, I just converted it. There might be some remnants of some weird conversion artifacts. So I can already see a couple, and it's hard to see unless we zoom really close in. There's these little circles that it picked up, which we'll just double click on them, delete them, and kind of look through the model. Delete that. I don't see much else in here. Everything else looks pretty good. And I do notice up here we have a little bit of like a jaggedness here. So I could leave that if I wanted to, but what I can do is just click in, delete the sections that I don't like, and then I can either do like a straight line to fix it, or I can do something like a point spline where I can kind of give it a little bit of a bend. So we'll do that, and then I'm going to bend it a little bit like that. Click OK, and then we'll click off of it, and then I'm just going to take that little bit. We have a little bit of a curve here from that bend we made. I'm just going to go ahead and break it, and then I'm going to go ahead and just select it and delete that out. So now we can still see we're fully constrained. I can select it, but we've cleaned up that curve a little bit. So one of the things we'll also want to do is just double click that and basically fix it so the whole thing is basically locked. That will help us out a little bit later when we start doing our offsets. If we have anything that's not fully connected, it'll help us kind of pinpoint that a little bit better. So now that we have that, we want to do a couple of offsets. Normally I would do 3 offsets just to give a border around the image, but since this image already kind of has a pretty thick border, I'm probably just going to do 2, one to have a line to extrude the outer lip, and then another one to extrude the inner kind of lip that holds the 2 pieces together. So what we'll go ahead and do, and I'm just going to double click on the outside of this, select everything, and then you can do an offset by pressing the O button. So from here, this is where we're going to start to reference our parameters. So instead of an actual size, I'm just going to do wall offset, which is about 5 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now we're going to zoom in here. First thing I already notice is that I can't click into this like I can here. So that means somewhere in here there is an open. Is this constrained? That is not constrained. So if you see, if I click on that one dot, it doesn't have a constraint like all these other ones do. So what we're going to do here, which usually means that I can just delete this and we'll recreate it real quick. All right, I probably should do that as a fixed point. We'll do that real quick, just to give it a little bit of a bend, but you can see how break this real quick. Yeah, much better. Now we can click in there. So that's usually the hardest part, is if you have something like that happen, trying to figure out which one of these points is not constrained, which is usually kind of where your breaks happen. Easiest way is you can click on the dots and it'll tell you which one. Sometimes they'll show up as white, meaning that they're not fully connected. But sometimes it's just a matter of kind of going around it and figuring out which one is that. So now we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to do another offset. So we're going to click our original line that we selected. And this time I actually want to do half of the original offset. So essentially our original one was 5 millimeters. This one's going to be 2.5. So using that same parameter, I can just make it 0.5 times the wall offset. That way, if I ever change it, it's always going to be half the size of whatever I set it to. So in here, right, we can see we have that same problem, and it's most likely going to be, it's not that one this time. So we'll probably have to figure out what's going on with that one. Like I said, this is the most annoying part, and you want to get this done before you start doing anything else, because it's going to screw up your extruding later on. Yeah, it's like little tiny ones. I'm going to delete this guy first just to make sure it's not this, even though it was constrained. No, it still wasn't that one, so very weird why sometimes offsets do that, but either way we'll figure it out pretty quickly. So everyone's got nice videos edited where they've already ran through a design, so this is what I end up going through. That looks alright. Which kind of sucks sometimes. You're like trying to figure out, it's like when you're coding and it's like one comma or a parentheses in the wrong spot. Screws the whole thing up. There we go. So I can try doing it this way. So weird how it's like one. Yeah, see, now we can already select it. Very weird. I don't know why it does that. If anybody knows, definitely put it down in the comments. So we'll break this again. So now we can select it, delete it, and now we can select both parts. So that one little stupid area screwed up our whole thing. All right, so now that took way too long, We have our sketch. It's in our size box for the most part. So we can go ahead and finish this, and I'll usually just not double click, but single click on here to rename this to our image, just to keep things nice and tidy. The build plate thing, don't need it anymore, right? We've kind of, at this point, used it for its purpose, so we'll hide that guy. So now that we have our image, first thing we want to do is extrude our bottom half of our light box. So what we can do is we can just drag around the entire thing, and then we can press the E button to do an extrude. So the way that I like to do it is, because everything is going to start extruding from our plane of our sketch, which is basically right where our sketch is, we want to have this be the top of our light box. So I want to set an offset to start extruding the bottom part essentially below the sketch. So what you can do is, instead of starting from our profile plane, we can actually start from an offset. So because an offset is going to be basically a positive number in the up direction and a negative number in the down direction, I can actually just say we're going to do a negative, and then I already have a preset in here for I believe it is thickness, lightbox thickness. So basically offsets where we're going to start. Now when we actually want to extrude that bottom plate, I already have a plate thickness, which is 2 millimeters. So it basically pushes it down, I think 33 millimeters, and then extrudes ourselves up 2. So our total thickness overall will be 35 when we're done. But this kind of sets us up for that bottom plate here. So now that we're good, the first thing we want to do, instead of making a body, we actually want to make a new component, because it's going to make it easier for us to export later on. So we'll go ahead and hit the OK button, and you'll see we get a new component here. So we'll rename this one, and we're going to call this bottom plate. Right, and now the other thing, it's going to hide your image anytime you do that, so just enable it. So we have that, and now what we want to do is bring up our wall, if you will, to where we're going to build the top plate. So one of the things that we can do, and this sometimes makes it a little bit easier to hide this first, is we're just going to select the outer offset. This is going to be basically the wall thickness, the 2.5 millimeters that we created. So our outermost one, we're going to pick that. We're going to unhide our bottom plane, and then we're going to press E4 extrude. So what we want to do now is, because we're going to have another one of these plates on the top, I want to do an offset, but this time I only want to offset the plate thickness, because we're going to add a top plate to this. And for the direction, instead of doing a distance, I just want to go down to wherever this is. So I can just do, instead of a distance, I can say to object, and I can just select our top of our bottom plate here. So you can kind of see what it's doing. It's giving us that space to build our top plate out, and then we basically have our whole bottom already kind of done for us. So once that's done, the one thing you're going to want to do is make sure you're on that component, so make sure the radio box is activated for that, and then you're going to do a join, because we want to join it to that bottom plate we just extruded out. So with that being said, we now have a nice bottom plate that we are pretty much done, outside of adding in like a hanger and like a hole for the light box cable, but we're done with the extruding for that. So now what we want to do is, I've kind of switched us back to being active on this Lightbox component, because the stuff that we're going to do now is going to actually be to create the top plate. So what we'll want to do, and we can hide this again, is we're going to select the entire thing, and we're going to hit the E button. All right, and what I tend to do for this, and we'll enable this just to see. Actually, we're not going to do that. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. So what we want to do is, we want to figure out colors now, because certain things are going to be certain thicknesses based on whether or not we want light to shine through them. So what I tend to do is find my my dark colors, so basically all my blacks. So we'll pick this, and if you want, you can always refer to your original image. Right, so eyes are black, outside are black, and that's pretty much all we care about. So we'll go through, and I'm just holding down Control to select multiples. So this is all the stuff that I don't want light to come through, and then I also have these outer edges that are going to be our the edge of our box. So these are all the things that I want to extrude. So I'm going to do an extrude, and we're going to do this a little bit differently than probably what you're used to seeing. So now that we have that, the first extrude that I'm going to do is to just start from our profile plane, and I'm going to extrude out negative non-light thickness. So it's just going to be 1 millimeter right now, so it's going to look kind of weird, but that's on purpose. So it's not going to fully meet our box, if you will, yet, but what it's going to do is set us up to kind of make the lid. So we're going to do, again, I'm active on the main component, and I'm going to do a new component for this one, and I'm going to hit OK. So I'm going to call this one top plate. And then what I'm also going to do is inside of here, I'm going to activate this component, and I'm going to go to create new component, and I'm just going to call this black, just because that's the color that it is. So I have an empty component in here. Because these are all of my bodies that are going to be the color black, I'm just going to click on them all and then basically add them to that component. So later on, when I'm doing my exports to save as mesh, I basically just have one component for each color. A little bit easier to keep it organized if you're ever going to come back and make changes, but that's how I tend to do it. So we're going to go ahead and reactivate our, actually we can stay on the black because we're going to change it up a little bit. So what we'll want to do now is we're going to hide both of these real quick. And what we want to do now is essentially select our outer edge, and we're going to extrude that down to meet our bottom plate. So if we hit the E for extrude, and I'm going to turn these both back on, I'm going to leave it just the way that it is, and I'm just going to change the extent to object, and I'm just going to get into here and basically select our bottom plate. It's initially going to try and do a cut because we're going through a body and then adding another one. Just change that to join, and then it's basically just going to give you a full 2.5 or I guess 2 millimeter wall on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and do join. I'm going to click OK, and now we have essentially a lid, but there's nothing really to keep it on, right? Because it's kind of just sitting there. So what we'll want to do, and I'll kind of show you how you can use this a little bit easier, is we're also going to unselect these again, and this time we're going to select this one. So this one is kind of right on the inside of our bottom edge wall, and then right next to our top lip. So with that being selected, we're going to extrude that, and we can unhide these again. And then for this, I'm just going to extrude out, I have this called wall thickness. It's basically 5 millimeters, if you will. So you'll see that it's essentially extruding, and I'm going to make this a join. So if we hide that bottom plate, right, it's basically giving us a lid to clip the top plate into. So we're basically joining to the existing bodies we have. We click on join, right, and then we have, now if we toggle this on and off, right, we basically have a lid to sit on top of our box. So at this point, the only thing we really have left to do is to finish off the rest of the colors, which in this case is just white and yellow. So I'm going to quickly do the yellow, so just 2 selections. I'm going to hit to activate the top plate because this is where we're going to be actually creating our next component. I'm going to hit the eyes were, oh, did it deselect that? There you go. I'm going to hit E to extrude those, and because these are the light side, I'm basically just going to say negative because we want to go down, not up, because everything is down from how we extruded this. This is going to be light thickness. So it's basically just a very small 0.6 millimeter extrude, and we're going to do this as a new component. And we're going to call this the yellow. And then we have another one to do just for the two eyes. And it's basically you're doing this one for each color. I do it that way when I export it, folks can change the color. So if they want to make Luma blue instead of yellow, right, they can just quickly change that in the slicer. So these are our white eyes. We're going to hit E. Again, I'm still active on the top plate. And I'm going to do this negative light thickness. And we're going to do new component. And we're going to change this to white. So now if I were to make this all one thing, it looks pretty solid at this point, right? So what we can do is hit the A button with everything active, and that's going to open up our appearance dialog. So if you just search like plastic, there's a ton of plastics that you can get. I favorited a bunch, but there's a whole ton of like matte and gloss finishes. This is really more just if you're going to take pictures and render it, or even if it's just sometimes helpful to differentiate that you have everything cut correctly. This is a good way to do it. So I have a yellow, I have a white, and I have a black. So I like to just have it set to component, and this is a very quick way to make sure you didn't screw up your extrudes. Just drag my yellow to yellow, drag my white to white, drag my black to black, and then also drag my black to the bottom plate. And you know, if we did everything correctly, we now have a nice light box. And one of the things that you can do just to make sure your extrudes and everything look right is there's a feature in Inspect called section analysis. And what this basically lets you do is cut your object and kind of walk through the insides of it to make sure everything is going to be flush and your light colors are the right thickness and your non-light lit colors are the right thickness. So if you click on section analysis, it's going to ask for a direction that you want to slice it in. So we'll slice it in this direction, and you can already see it's started to cut it. I'm going to hide this so it's a little easier for us to see. But if we kind of come up here with this little arrow, right, we can kind of come in and see, more importantly, right, if we zoom in, we have our lid, which is this is the 5 millimeter that we extruded down for the wall thickness, and this is the 2 millimeter for the top. And then for everything else, that's kind of the image, is the non-lit section is just 1 millimeter, and then the lit section, which is the yellow here, is 0.6. So you can kind of go through that and make sure all of your extrudes and everything are kind of lined up the way you expect them to be. And this is kind of a little cool feature where you can drag all this stuff through, make sure your eyes are good, make sure everything's kind of, give it a once over, make sure everything looks like it's going to fit together. So you can click on that, you can click OK or click cancel, but if you click OK and it's active, it will end up here in the analysis section, which you can just turn on or off. So sometimes it's nice to be able to go back and validate that. But for us, everything looks pretty much good for the most part. So the only thing we're missing is a hole at the bottom where we can put in our cable. And then we also need on the back side, right, we want to cut a hole for to hang it on a wall. So one thing we can do, and we'll kind of come back to our home here, right, is I have a couple things in my template. One is the keyhole sketch. So one of the things that you can do is you can just very quick and easy hit move sketch object and select that, and I can rotate this the way I need it. 3040 looks good, and what I'll tend to do is just kind of look at where this makes sense. If I need to move this back, there's obviously a way better way to do this, but I just do so many of these that it's just easier for me to kind of eyeball it at this point. There we go, so that's 45, and we're just trying to basically line this up with the center of that. So you could do a new sketch on the back plane if you really wanted to get fancy with it. I just use the one I already have sketched out. So I'll click OK to move that, and then all I'm really going to do at that point is just select this, select that, select this, select that whole thing, do an extrude, and I'm not even gonna fool around, I'm just gonna cut it. So just drag it through a little bit, hit OK to cut, and you know, now we essentially have a little keyhole there where we can hang a screw on it. That being said, we also have to do the bottom piece, which I also have a cable hole, which is sometimes a little bit of a pain depending on where you have that positioned in space. Sometimes it's easier just to draw a new one, but we'll go ahead and see if we can repurpose this one. So this one just takes a little bit of kind of fiddling with how you want to build it, but like I said, these parts I don't take a ton of time to get right, just because they're more cosmetic than anything else. And we just look at where we want to put this. So we want to keep that in line with our other one. We can shift this kind of over here. That looks pretty good. So I'll click OK. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to click E for extrude, punch it up a little bit, cut it. Right, I got a little box hole here. So you can do that however you want. You can make a plane here, draw a new sketch and use this as the plane. But you know, however you want to do that part, not a big deal. Like I said, I already have it in my template, so I just have it coming out the bottom for the most part. This hole's pretty much centered. And then if we come back here or go back to our home, so one of the nice things that I like to do on certain things, if the geometry plays nice to it, is instead of having this kind of rough, solid outline, what I'll sometimes do is put a fillet on it. So if I can kind of daisy chain these up a bit, and sometimes it lets you, sometimes it doesn't, depending on the how the, I guess, the tangency of the curves are. We can go ahead and select, and we probably can, it's probably easier if I just do this in not a gigantic operation, but we'll give it a shot. I'm just selecting all of my top faces here. Let's see if it'll let me do. Let's see, is it going to give us a complaint about that? It doesn't seem to like that. I'll try that again. We'll just do it a little bit at a time. So interesting. All right. Well, like I said, I don't know why it won't let us put a fillet on that, but you should be able to. That's gonna bother me now. Yeah, so like that, I'll put a fillet around it. We'll see if it lets me do the rest of these. There we go. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I find if I try to do them all in one giant operation, it just doesn't like them for some reason. It could just be my computer, but who knows? do these guys. We'll go back in and do this other one. And I'm by no means an expert in Fusion 360, so all you people watching me struggle here, this is just my daily struggle. Alright, I think that's the whole thing. Cool. So I like that little bit of a roundness to it. Sometimes you can do 2.5, but I think it just gives it a little bit more of a nicer effect. The light bounces off it a little bit nicer when you're doing a render. So one of the things to keep in mind, if you are going to do that fillet, obviously, well, anyway, you always want to make sure you print this face down. That way your bed surface is the surface that this is printed on. But that being said, if we go over to our render, right, we now have a nice, we'll kind of make this our set current view as the front. That way we get a little bit of a backlit effect going on over here. So boom. Right, we got our nice light box all set and configured. We can go and render this out if we wanted to, but now to go ahead and save it, it's actually super simple, right? So I'm gonna just save the project, but as far as saving the meshes for your slicer, we can basically just right click each component, and well, we're gonna be in design mode, right click, save as mesh, make sure it's set to STL, and then millimeter, and then basically we'll go and save this as bottom plate, and then we can go right click our black, save as mesh, we'll say black, save as mesh, and it's super simple. I just basically run through all these. So now I only have 4 files I have to deal with instead of a million bodies that I'd have to, like if I go to, you know, black for an example, it's probably like 4 or 5 bodies. Yeah, I don't have to export all of them individually, just one giant component. So now that I have that, I could just go right into Bamboo if I wanted to, and we'll go ahead and create a new project. And what's nice about this is now I can just go desktop, and I can say, let's do our bottom plate. All right, we'll add a new one of this, we'll add, and we'll just say black, yellow, white, and we'll add it as one part. And for this, we just need to go to our objects tab. I'll make everything black except for the white section. We'll make white, and the yellow section we'll make yellow. And that should already start looking good. On this, because we want to print the top side down, we're just going to do auto orient, and it should flip it for us. And then we'll just take this and we'll move it out of the way. So now we have everything nice and oriented. It fits our build plate. We can see our keyhole. We can see our LED hole. Everything's colored correctly. And then the only thing that I normally do is I have a Lightbox profile that I use that kind of has a little bit of overlapping for some of these colors, so they don't have any separation when you go to actually print them. So there's a lot of tutorials on what settings to use for that, but that makes it super easy to print, right? And what's nice about this is the outside is going to be the bulk of your print time. I used to print the wall on the top half, but I can spit this whole thing out with an AMS in like, probably, if I look at this, it's probably gonna be like an hour and 10 minutes. Hour 30, right? So I can spit this whole thing out in an hour 30, and then this is just one color, so it'll print pretty quickly. So I tend to now make my top part the smaller component. That way, whatever reason it gets screwed up, first layer stinks, accidentally punch a hole through one of the sections trying to pop it off the build plate, I can just reprint that pretty easily. So I tend to make the bottom half the thicker component. Because there is no tolerances between these, that lip that we put on should hold pretty snugly, and then like a couple drops of glue in the corner will permanently fix that so it doesn't come out. but it should snap together pretty tightly out of the box. But here you go. You got a Lightbox. You can upload it on, Maker World or wherever you want. Print it, sell it, whatever you got. But super easy. I know I kind of rushed through some things, but I'm assuming you've used through Fusion360 somewhat to understand how to work your way around it. But that's kind of my start to finish. And then obviously, once you're done with that, you now have a template that you can basically just repurpose. And I mean, this took me walking you guys through about 35 minutes. So you can do them in like 15 minutes a piece once you kind of have the process down. So that being said, hopefully you guys got some enjoyment out of it. Any comments, feedback, whatever you got, leave it down below. All right, stay safe.